There's a version of this story that will break your heart if you let it. A microbiologist, young, brilliant, is pulled out of his ordinary life by a secret arm of the government. He's driven into the desert north of Las Vegas, to a facility that doesn't appear on any map, and put to work on the strangest assignment in human history. In a sealed chamber, behind glass, there is a living creature, small, gray, not from here. And over months, working close to it, taking tissue samples from its body, the scientist begins to feel something, a presence at the edge of his own mind. The creature is speaking to him not with sound, but directly, thought to thought. It shows him the deep future. It tells him what the grays actually are, and where they come from, and what is coming for all of us. And when it is finally taken away, the story goes, it leaves one last message behind. That's the version that has circulated for 20 years. It has a name attached to it, a real man with a real face, who told it in real interviews you can still watch tonight. I want to take that story seriously enough to actually check it. Because when you do, when you follow every thread of it back to where it started, you find something. It's just not an alien. The scientist has a name, Dan Burisch, or, and this is where it begins, Danny Benjamin Crane, born the 2nd of February, 1964, in the Los Angeles area. Somewhere around 1995, he changed his surname to Burisch, taking his wife Deborah's family name. Same man. 2 names. Remember that, because names matter in this story more than almost anything else. Here is what the record actually shows about Dan Burisch. He earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, in 1986. That's real. That's documented. It is also, as far as anyone has ever been able to verify, the entirety of his formal scientific training, because the rest of the resume is where it starts to come apart. Burisch has long claimed a doctorate, a PhD in microbiology or molecular genetics, depending on which telling you catch, from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, awarded around 1989 or 90. It is the credential that makes the whole story work. A microbiologist studies the tissue of the alien, not a college graduate, a doctor. Stony Brook says he was never enrolled. Not the records are sealed, not we can neither confirm nor deny, no record of the man. And when that gap gets pointed out, the explanation offered is the one that should always make you sit up a little straighter. The records were erased. The secret program scrubbed them. The very absence of proof becomes, in this telling, the proof. Hold on to that move. We're going to see it again. It is the engine of the entire thing. Let me lay out the claim at full strength, the way its believers hear it, because it deserves that before we test it. Burisch says he was recruited by Majestic, 1-2, the alleged secret committee at the heart of American UFO lore, and stationed at a facility called S4 near Papoose Lake, in the shadow of Area 51. There, under something called Project Aquarius, he was assigned to a captive extraterrestrial, a gray. He worked with it inside what he called a clean sphere, taking tissue samples, and the creature, he says, communicated with him telepathically. He called it J-Rod. Over the years, the story grew. It didn't stay a story about one scientist and one alien. It became a cosmology. There was Project Lotus, and a thing called the Ganesh particle. There was a device, the Looking Glass, also called a Stargate, that could see into probable futures using counter-rotating plasma. Its design supposedly decoded from ancient Sumerian cylinder seals, and J-Rod, it turned out, wasn't a visitor from another star at all. J-Rod was us, a human being from tens of thousands of years in the future, one branch of a damaged descendant species, designated by codes like P45 and P52. The individual he worked with even acquired a name of its own, Chi-La. Notice what's happening to the story as it grows. It's not accumulating evidence, it's accumulating architecture. Each new layer, the particle, the device, the future timeline, adds not a single thing that could be checked, and removes the story a little further from any place a person could go and look. That is not how real discoveries behave. Real discoveries get simpler and more testable as they mature. This did the opposite. So, where did it actually start? Not in a desert, in documents and interviews, and we can date them. Around 1994, a paper begins to circulate catalogued as Q94109A, sometimes called the Project Aquarius document. It reads like a technical report on tissue sampling from an extraterrestrial biological entity, an EBE, designated by that now familiar string, J-Rod. A word on that term, EB. It did not originate with Burisch. It and its cousin Eben go back to the early 1980s to the disputed Majestic 1-2 papers, the so-called Eisenhower briefing document, and to a man named Paul Benowitz, whose story is its own cautionary tale about how these mythologies feed on each other. The vocabulary was already lying around. Burisch picked it up and built. In 1996, under the pen name B.J. Wolfe, Burisch co-authored a book with a collaborator named Marcy McDowell about, of all things, alleged structures on Mars. In 1999, a researcher named Bill Hamilton found that Q94 document online and shared it to a mailing list. By 2002, Hamilton was recording long video interviews with Burisch, and in April of 2004, Burisch went on Coast to Coast AM, the overnight radio home of American paranormal culture, and the story went national. The broadcaster and researcher Linda Moulton Howe promoted it. For a moment, it worked. A credentialed-sounding scientist, a captive alien, insider language, a paper trail. It had the shape of truth. And then people who actually knew how to check things started checking. Here is the part the legend leaves out. The man who did the most damage to the J-Rod story was not a skeptic sneering from the outside. He was one of the most respected investigative journalists in the UFO field. His name is George Knapp. Knapp is a Las Vegas television reporter, many local Emmys, a real newsroom career. He is also the man who in 1989 put Bob Lazar and the name S4 on television in the first place. We'll come back to Lazar. The point is, Knapp is not a debunker by temperament. He has spent his life taking these subjects seriously, which is exactly what makes his verdict on Burisch land the way it does. In the summer of 2004, in the pages of UFO magazine, Knapp took the story apart. He did not hedge. He called Burisch, in print, a phony baloney goofball, and added memorably, "You can quote me." But the insults aren't the evidence. The evidence is what Knapp and his colleagues actually found. Knapp pulled employment records, and during the very years Burisch claimed to be earning his secret doctorate and working with an alien, the records told a different story. He was working as a parole officer for the state of Nevada. That, by the way, is reportedly how he met Deborah. She was, according to Knapp's reporting, a parole or probation client. Later, he and his wife did security work at Las Vegas casinos. A parole officer, a casino security guard. When that came out, the answer from Burisch's defenders was, "You already know what it was. It was cover. The mundane job was the disguise the secret program gave him." There's more. A researcher named Royce Myers III, who ran a site called UFO Watchdog, obtained a resume of Burisch's from 1991, no doctorate on it, and in 2002, Burisch filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. On the filing, his occupation is listed as homemaker. His wife is listed as a casino supervisor. And the debts include, this is the detail I keep coming back to, around $15,000 in student loans. Sit with that one. The government supposedly funded his secret education, erased the records, ran his career for decades, and he's carrying $15,000 of his own student debt into a bankruptcy court, listing himself as a homemaker. That is not a detail a person invents to make a legend more impressive. It's a detail that surfaces because it's true, and because bankruptcy filings are public, and because the man never expected anyone to pull his. The reporter who found that filing, Jared Schenke, wrote that the documents revealed a story that seemed to keep evolving over time. That is the kindest possible way to say it. There was, for a while, a photograph, a picture of J-Rod itself, promoted by a Burisch associate and posted to the Coast to Coast AM website. Proof, finally. A face. UFO Watchdog looked at it, and what they found was that the image appeared to be a photocopy, inverted, reversed, of a special effects dummy, a prop. I want to be precise about why that matters, beyond the obvious. It's not just that the photo was fake, it's what the fake tells you about the ecosystem. A real captive alien, worked on for years by a real scientist inside a real facility, and the best image anyone could produce for the public was a flipped photocopy of a Halloween-grade dummy. The evidence didn't just fail to appear. The substitute for evidence was that thin. Even Linda Moulton Howe, who had helped carry the story, began attaching the word alleged to it once the resume and the bankruptcy filing were on the table. That's the sound of a story losing its floor. By 2007, the story had a new custodian and a new, higher gear. An outfit called Project Camelot, run by Bill Ryan and Carrie Cassidy, released a set of interviews they titled Stargate Secrets, recorded in Las Vegas that June. This is where the looking glass device took center stage, and this is where the story made its one great mistake. It made a prediction. The looking glass, Burisch explained, could peer into probable futures, but there was a wall it could not see past, a convergence point where all the branching timelines came together. That point had a date, the 21st of December, 2012. Now, if you were alive and paying attention that month, you know what happened on the 21st of December, 2012. Nothing. No convergence. No catastrophe. No unveiling. The most specific, checkable, falsifiable claim the entire mythology ever produced an actual date, came and passed, and the world went to work the next morning. And here is the tell, the thing I most want you to take from this whole account. The failure of that prediction did not end the story. It was absorbed by it. The explanation offered was that the timelines had stabilized. The danger had been averted. The very fact that nothing happened became evidence that the secret work had succeeded. There is no prediction this framework can fail. If the date brings disaster, the device was right. If the date brings nothing, the device was right, and we were saved. A claim that survives its own disproof isn't a claim about the world. It's a machine for staying believed. One more thing about that looking glass, because it shows the whole method in miniature. Looking glass is also the real name of a genuine Cold War program, an airborne command, post the U.S., kept aloft for decades to run a nuclear war if the ground was gone. Real, declassified, verifiable. Borrow a true name, attach it to an invented device, and a little of the truth's weight transfers over. That's the technique. Real scaffolding. Invented rooms. Burisch was not alone. There was an earlier man who told an overlapping story, and he deserves his own moment because his case is genuinely more sympathetic and, in a way, more instructive. His name was Bill Uhouse, William George Uhouse, 1925 to 2009. And unlike Burisch, part of Uhouse's biography holds up. He appears to have really served as a Marine. At least one independent researcher reported verifying his Marine Corps service through records. He was, by the accounts, a real veteran and a real engineer. What Uhouse claimed is where the ground opens up. He said he spent some 30 years working on flight simulators for recovered alien craft, including one from a crash near Kingman, Arizona, in 1953, and that he, too, interacted with a telepathic gray called J-Rod. His account appeared in Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project event at the National Press Club in 2001, and in the writer Jim Mars's book Alien Agenda. Here's why Uhouse matters. He shows you that the pieces of this story were free-floating, drifting between tellers, attaching to whoever would carry them. The name J-Rod itself has no stable origin. One account says it came from early attempts to communicate through symbols, another that a linguist supplied it. A retired Air Force officer called the entity Jared and the puppet master. Nobody agrees. because there was never a fact underneath to agree about. There was only a name, passing hand to hand, picking up a new backstory at every stop. And that Kingman crash U-House anchored his story too? It traces to a single account given to a UFO investigator named Raymond Fowler in 1973 by a Nevada test site engineer who was given the pseudonym Fritz Werner. One man, one story, half a century old, never corroborated. A legend resting on a legend. To really understand J-Rod, you have to go underneath it, to the thing it was built on top of, because Burisch didn't invent the template, he inherited it. In 1989, George Knapp, yes, him again, put a man on Las Vegas television, first in shadow under the name Dennis, then openly. The man was Bob Lazar. And Lazar told the story that every later version, including Burisch's, would echo, that he had worked at a facility called S4 near Papoose Lake, reverse engineering, flying saucers powered by a mysterious substance he called Element 115. Lazar's claims are the master key, and Lazar's claims have the same crack running through them. He said he held master's degrees from MIT and from Caltech. The nuclear physicist and UFO researcher Stanton Friedman again, not a hostile skeptic, a man who spent his life arguing for the reality of Roswell, went looking for the paper trail. No diplomas, no theses, no transcripts, no commencement listings. The only professor Lazar could name taught not at Caltech but at a community college, Pierce, where Lazar himself was, in fact, enrolled during the same period he claimed to be at MIT. And there's a matter of court record. In 1990, Lazar pleaded guilty to a felony connected to a Nevada brothel and was sentenced to probation and community service. That's not a smear. It's a fact about the reliability of a man who also asked the public to take his uncorroborated word about alien reactors. Now, Element 115. For years this looked like Lazar's trump card, because when he named it, Element 115 didn't officially exist. And then, in 2003, it was synthesized by a Russian institute working with an American national laboratory. It was later named Moscovium. Believers called it Vindication. But look at what the element actually is. Its isotopes are almost unimaginably unstable. The most stable one yet made survives for a fraction of a second before it decays. It is not, and cannot be, the stable slab of fuel Lazar described powering a spacecraft. The universe made the name real and left the claim impossible. Predicting that a not yet discovered element might someday be found is not the same as being right about it. A stopped clock names the hour twice a day. So let's go to the desert ourselves. Because Area 51 is not a hoax. Area 51 is real, and its real history is stranger and more human than the alien version, and it tells you exactly why these stories grow there. The site at Groom Lake was scouted in the spring of 1955. The men who chose it included Kelly Johnson, the legendary Lockheed engineer. One of them looked at that dry lake bed ringed by mountains and, half joking, called it Paradise Ranch, to make it sound like somewhere an engineer might agree to be sent. The nickname stuck. They called it the Ranch. What they built and flew there was genuinely secret and genuinely revolutionary. The U-2 spy plane, the A-12 Oxcart, an aircraft that flew at 3 times the speed of sound at the edge of space in the early 1960s. Later, the F-117 stealth fighter. For decades, the United States government would not admit the base existed at all. And then, on the 15th of August, 2013, it did. A declassified CIA history of the U-2 and Oxcart programs pried loose by a Freedom of Information request from the National Security Archive was released to the public. And in its pages, in plain language, it names the place. It describes the aircraft. It confirms the secrecy, the denials, the whole apparatus of a hidden government facility. There is not one word in it about a captive alien. This is the thing believers never quite reckon with. The secret came out. The archive opened. The truth about Area 51 was declassified, and handed to the public, and the truth was airplanes. Extraordinary, world-changing, top-secret airplanes. If the government could keep the ox cart secret for 50 years and then release the file, the idea that a living alien would leave no better trace than a flipped photocopy of a dummy becomes very hard to hold. But now you can see why the alien stories chose this spot. Here was a real place where the government really did lie, really did deny, really did hide extraordinary things behind a fence in the desert. That's fertile ground. If they hid that, the reasoning goes, what else? The truth about Area 51 didn't debunk the myth, it fed it. The reality of the small secret became the license for the enormous one. By now, the pattern should be visible, so let me name it directly, because it's the actual subject of this film. The J-Rod story survives not because of its evidence, but because of its design. It has 4 properties, and together they make it nearly indestructible. First, the whistleblower frame. The story comes from an insider breaking his oath at great personal risk. That framing turns every weakness into a strength. No documents, they were destroyed. No corroboration, everyone else is still bound by secrecy or has been silenced. The absence of proof is pre-explained as the cost of the truth. Second, the unfalsifiable core. Telepathy leaves no recording, sealed programs can't be checked, and branching timelines, as we saw, convert a failed prediction into a success. There is no observation you could make that the story hasn't already accounted for. That feels like strength. It is the exact opposite. A thing that can't be tested can't be trusted. Third, the true scaffolding. Real Area 51, real declassified secrets, a real element with the right number, a real Cold War program named Looking Glass. Every genuine fact the story borrows makes the invented parts feel a little more solid because our minds don't sort a paragraph into true and false, line by line. We take the temperature of the whole thing, salt the fiction with enough verified fact, and the fiction inherits the credibility. And fourth, the ecosystem. Coast to Coast, AM, Earth Files, Project Camelot. And now, 2 decades on, YouTube documentaries and social feeds recycling the same interviews from 2004 and 2007 to audiences who were children when the bankruptcy filing surfaced, and who have no reason to know it exists. The story doesn't need to be true to keep spreading. It only needs to keep being watched, and it is very, very watchable. That's not an accident of this one case. That's the anatomy of the durable modern myth. Let me go back to where we started, the last message, the thing the alien supposedly left behind before it was taken away. I've spent this whole film telling you there was no alien. So let me tell you what I think the real final message is, the one this story actually leaves behind, if you follow it all the way down. It isn't about the future of the species. It isn't temporal physics or the origins of the Greys. It's smaller than that and much closer to home. It's about a man named Danny Crane, who had a bachelor's degree and a job as a parole officer and $15,000 in student loans, and who, at some point, began telling a story in which he was the most important scientist on Earth chosen, cleared, entrusted with the secret of secrets. And it's about how many of us wanted, and still want, that story to be true. Enough of us that it has outlived its own disproof by more than a decade. That's the real thing in the sealed chamber, not a creature from the future, the oldest, most human wish there is to be the one who was let in on it, to have the universe single you out and whisper. I'm not going to tell you there is nothing unexplained in the sky. There is. Serious people study it now, in the open, with instruments and hearings and their names attached. That's the honest version of this hunger, and it's a good one. But J-Rod was never that. J-Rod was a name that drifted between men, picking up a new story at every stop, a photocopied dummy, a doctorate that no university has any record of, a date that came and went, a secret desert that turned out, when the file was finally opened, to be full of airplanes. The Gray didn't leave a final message. The man did. And the message was about him and, if we're honest, about us. We just have to be willing to read it.